continue our celebration of the season of emancipation with this, an act of great courage. Hello and welcome. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for your time. In last week's program, historian Bobby Morris and Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, in a lively and engaging discussions, made their positions abundantly clear regarding the role of Washington Franklin in the 1816 rebellion in Barbados. This week's program takes you directly to the battlefields of St. Philip.
The revolution, when it finally came, was a gradual process of effective planning to disrupt and to destroy that entire arrangement that the white community had become comfortable with.
So when the enslaved African Barbadians rose up on that fateful night on Sunday, the 14th of April, 1816.
Goodness gracious, what the hell is going on? Sammy! 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 Oh, Buster, it's you.
Master, the whole place burning down. What happened?
I don't know. I'm looking for that little idiot to get the water cart out. Have you seen Sammy anywhere?
No, sir.
Look, Buster, do me a favor. I think the slaves are trying to create some sort of disturbance. You go around and lock all the gates for me.
Yes, sir.
Good, good. Very...
Look, Sammy, you're under there, sir.
Where is he? Oh, God!
There was a sense of shock and awe, disbelief that this was actually happening. And many of the people who were there observing it made reference to the fact that it was shock more than anything else that created the profile of disbelief. They could not understand why we thought these people were happy. We thought they were comfortable in their enslavement. We have seen a few skirmishes here and there in the past, but they couldn't have possibly imagined an island-wide revolution planned all around them at the headquarters of slavery in the New World, in the Caribbean and beyond. And also remember, this is the first major rebellion after the Haitian Revolution. A few young men who were in the West India Regiment had arrived at Bridgetown off a ship a few weeks beforehand, and they were arrested and thrown into jail because there was rumors that the Haitians were going to be sending emissaries down to Barbados to start a rebellion. And these black West Indian soldiers arrived as part of the garrison here at the Savannah. And because of the rumors, they were just arrested and put into jail because they could have been, they could have been emissaries from Haiti coming to Barbados to stimulate revolution.
Now, you would recall that this was the first significant and far-reaching rebellion after the Haitian Revolution. It was, in a sense, a validation of that historic event that occurred in Haiti and remains the example of all rebellions.
So the Barbados Revolution is the mother of all revolutions for this simple reason. It is the first that comes after the Haitian Revolution, which suggests that the Haitian Revolution was not a one-off. It was not a historical freak, but in fact, it was part of a broader agenda. And Barbados, that had been the first slave society, had risen up in support of what the Haitians had done. So that validated, that action in Barbados was the first major validation of the Haitian Revolution. And that is why it's significant. It's the mother of all rebellions, also precisely because it is taking place in the headquarters. It is not in a colony out in the periphery that had been involved in rebellions consistently because of the geography. You come down the mountains, you attack the enslavers, you go back to the mountains and so on. There was none of that. This was a place where the model was completely enclosed. you had 80,000 enslaved Africans being managed by 12,000 white people, and 12,000 versus 80,000 with a garrison, thousands of professional soldiers at a garrison ready and prepared to march against you if you revolt. So Barbados was seen as the place with the most developed military security. The military apparatus for keeping these Africans in slavery in Barbados was the most developed and the most sophisticated. So what are the enslaved Africans up against? They're up against a military complex that is professional, sophisticated, and ready for war.
The research indicates that our ancestors were fully aware of the prevailing conditions. They understood not only the weaponry, but the military might that was surrounding them.
They were facing the British Army. Britain had the St. Anne's Fort, the military complex at the garrison, perhaps the biggest military installation, British military installation in the Caribbean, where you had stationed not only the regular British Army, the white British Army, but you also had stationed several battalions of the black British West India Regiment. This was a special regiment that the British military, in all of their devilish psychology, they had put together an army of blacks. Some of them given the choice, either you remain a slave or you come and serve the British Army. They had put together this army to fight the French in the Napoleonic Wars. So these are battle-hardened soldiers. So our ancestors know that these are the tremendous odds they're up against.
The enslaved population was of the view that the British military regiment would not fight them. And of course, that seemed logical. Well, one would think.
People tell me that when the soldiers turn up, the black soldiers turn up, and how the fellas say, they're coming to free us for the Queen. To me, that is mythology that was set up by the same white people. They would bunk to know that soldiers coming at you with guns. They're coming to kill you and coming to your friends. To me, that is really knocking down the intellect of our slaves. They say the slaves were very happy when they saw the black Bourbons. The black Bourbons were trained to kill them, man. Just like now, if we do foolishness, our brother in the army and the police say, well, shoot us. They will even think twice. That's their job. Anybody out there go and start a rebellion and think that they can say that, oh man, the army is now all black boys, and the Coast Guard black boys, and they're going to hit us with mock bullets. Don't understand how the system works.
These were professional soldiers, carefully selected and positioned, and most definitely intent on following the orders given from their superiors.
Secondly, they're up against a circumstance where there are British soldiers scattered around the Windward Islands, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, all within reach of Barbados. And importantly, there was the tradition of parish militias. The island was organized into these parishes, and each parish had a militia, and the militia was fully armed and always well trained, and trained by the imperial soldiers. So there was a parish to parish political and military system in addition to the garrison. Plus, there were always British war machines docked in the Bridgetown Harbor, because Barbados is also part of a communications and mercantile system.
Within that context, this Bussa Rebellion was an act of tremendous courage. And our ancestors were saying, look, even if we don't benefit from this, even if we end up giving our lives, but we are doing it for our progeny. We are doing it so that future generations will not have to live in a state of enslavement as we have had to live.
This is not where you expect revolution, but this is the place where the most effective revolution was planned, right in the center of this complex. So that makes it really the mother of all the slave revolutions of that time.
It sent a real shock right through the entire British Empire and sent a signal that this system of enslavement, the bell was tolling.
Bear in mind, this is an island-wide revolution. How do we know that? Well, we know that it is headquartered in St. Philip. There is that Bussa configuration at Bailey's and all of the plantations in the St. Philip parish. That we know. We also know from the letters of Colonel Rycroft Bess, who was at Lotus Plantation, Christchurch. We also know that Christchurch was also in the early stages of the revolution. That we know from the letters of Colonel Rycroft Bess. We also know that it was in Bridgetown, because we have the garrison papers, the imperial soldiers, who on their way to St. Philip were told that there was an uprising in Bridgetown and a detachment of the soldiers had to be sent back to Bridgetown to bring Bridgetown under control. So we know St. Philip, we know Christchurch, and we know Bridgetown. But from the records of Lord Harewood, who owned the Bell Plantation in the outer perimeter of St. Michael, the Bell Plantation, you know, we have from his records that the Bell Plantation went up in rebellion. We also have from his records, he owned the Mount Plantation in St. George. The Mount Plantation is also up in rebellion. In fact, the Africans on the Mount Plantation in St. George destroyed the entire place. They destroyed the great house, they gutted it, they burnt all the buildings and the plantation yard, and we have a list of all the structures that were destroyed at the Mount Plantation in St. George. So we moved St. Philip, Christchurch, Bridgetown, inner St. Michael, outer St. Michael, and now we're in St. George. But we also know from our study of Rock Hall Village in St. Thomas, Freedom Village, we also know the records of that estate, that the owner of the estate had compensated his enslaved people for not joining the revolution and for attacking those people in St. Thomas who were up in revolution. The records showing that there was activity in St. Lucy at the Bourbon estate. So we're now in St. Lucy, and the St. Lucy parish is now subject to uprising, and we also know from the records that the rebels from St. Lucy are trying to connect through to St. Thomas, trying to connect through to St. Philip. And indeed, from the imperial records, we know that while the soldiers were attacking the rebels in St. Philip, their reports are saying that rebel reinforcements are coming in overnight from St. John. So while they're fighting in St. Philip, the reinforcements are coming through from St. John. So when you put all of that on a map, from St. Lucy through to St. John, St. Thomas in the center of the island, St. George in the center of the island, through St. Philip, Christchurch, Bridgetown, and the southern periphery, what you're looking at is a massive island-wide organization.
Aye! Ah! Bassa! Bassa? Bassa, what happened?
I believe they shoot down Buster so to see. Nobody interview Buster. They saw the sea. Bam! Gone. They would have gone with certain people in mind. When you see, bam! That's the man you're looking for. And I feel he would have won. He horse as usual. So when you come with all these people and one man up there on a horse, shoot me! Bam! Gone. I don't think Buster lasted too long. And I always say that Buster was a martyr. Basso never expected to win anything. He would have to be dreaming. Nor did he expect to live. That is why I respect him so much. Listen, you're at the top of St. Philip, not the edge of St. Philip. To take over Barbados, every plantation has a militia. Every single plantation has a militia. The soldiers, etc. But the real power in Barbados is St. Michael, is St. Anne's Fort, and Garrison, etc. So in order to move from St. Philip and take over, you have to lick up a lot of parties till you get there. Was it that your expectation was that spontaneously all these people will come out and so on?
Now, something of note was brought to light through the research of historian Bobby Morris, and it is worth sharing because it raises more questions.
But I explore that too in my second article in terms of how many people on Baileys and Wiltshires and how many people on Simmons and all those plantations actually came out, because I had lists now at Harrow Plantation in 1811. I have a list of Harrow Plantation in 1817, the year after the revolt, and the same thing for Baileys. Most of the people were still on the estate, on both estates. I have big long lists showing you the names before and after those estates. Prune those two lists. Let me see who was here 10 years before. Let me see who was there. That's a year after. Man, a lot of them weren't there. Right? But not enough to give you the feeling that there was widespread support on the plantation. Plantation might got 200 and something workers, and maybe only 30 went out. So when you look back at the list, most of the people still on the list. They didn't go. So that taught me too that we talk about rebellions and revolutions, but it's hard to move most people to come and go out there and lose their life. That's why I say Basso was a martyr. He knew he was going to die.
Well, this program continues to emphasize the importance of research, presenting your findings and correctly interpreting all of the above.
We know that about 2,000 people on this island were killed in 2 to 3 days of fighting. 2,000 in 2 to 3 days, if you put that on the scale of the Vietnam War, or you put that on the scale of Baghdad, the American invasion, you put that on the scale of the American Civil War, 2,000 people in 2 days is a lot of people slaughtered. Not to mention those who were a rope put around their neck and hang from trees across the island. We now have that information. So after 3 or 4 days of carrying out these executions, the Barbados government began to ask some other questions. Could this happen again? And in answering that question, then they began to realize that there were people with names like Bassa. Yes, there was names like Franklin, and of course, Franklin was a very unfortunate man because there was no due process. They just went to his house, dragged him out of his house, and put a rope around his neck. He wasn't given the chance to even explain himself. He was just murdered, and of course, having murdered a man, then that had to be covered up. But we know how that cover-up took place and why. The simple argument was that this revolution had to have been organized by somebody who was not African. And yes, here is a mixed race man, a mulatto man. Clearly, mulatto men were of a higher intellectual capacity. They're half white. And there were many prominent mulatto men in the society. There were many prominent mulatto men who were slave owners, who owned large estates, who were significant merchants. So mulatto men were respected for their capacity. So clearly, you know, you look in that direction.
Well, it is believed that we are getting closer and closer to a better understanding of exactly what happened in Barbados in 1816 as it relates to that rebellion.
Information is emerging piece by piece. What is significant is that Lord Hereward, who was the largest of the Barbados slave owners, and who, as I said, he owned the Bell Estate, he owned Thistle Estate in St. Philip, he owned the Mount Estate in St. George, and many others. He organizes a massive gala event to celebrate the military success of Colonel Codd. Colonel Codd is a man who led the soldiers out of the garrison across Barbados, massacring black people. And there is this gala event in London as a fundraiser to give a big endowment to Colonel Codd for saving Barbados from the black community. And Barbados could now continue along its journey as the heart of slavery in the Caribbean. Now, it is the decade after the Buster Rebellion that is of great significance. You can very well imagine the people have risen up for their freedom and to take control. They are defeated. The records then began to show that the mopping up operations were some of the bloodiest in Caribbean history. In fact, the records we have from the British soldiers, and one work on the assumption that there's a protocol and training that professional soldiers are asked to comply by. You don't, when you defeat people and you have prisoners, you don't just shoot prisoners in cold blood. There's a protocol about incarceration, prisons of war, going to court. There's a whole protocol that professional soldiers. And the ones in Bridgetown were expected to abide by those codes. From their records, they describe being ashamed and embarrassed as soldiers by how the Barbados slave owners were massacring men, women, and children at random across the island. So we have information where the British soldiers are now intervening to prevent the white Barbadians from just massacring innocent people on the streets, in the villages, on the estates. So that becomes important to read how soldiers were saying to the slave owners, okay, you're angry that your enslaved people have risen up, they've burnt your great houses, they've burnt your canes and so on, and you're angry, but you cannot massacre people like this. So then the soldiers intervene to stop it, and the governor of Barbados intervened to put an end to it. So that after a year, there are about 123 of the convicted rebels still in the Bridgetown prison. And the governor decided no more hanging. There's been enough hanging on this island. Thousands have been put to the gallows. These remaining 123, we're going to deport them. So they were deported to Honduras, and from Honduras, they were deported to Sierra Leone. So we've been able to track them down to Sierra Leone. And now we have this large community of Barbadians in Sierra Leone, most of them derived from this 123 who were sent out there. In fact, one of the first graduates in medical science of the University of Edinburgh was the son of one of those men who was deported from Barbados.
And so we must always remember that sacrifice. They were all martyred. Buster was killed in the fighting. Jackie, Nanny Gregg would have been either killed in the fighting or executed, because all of the ringleaders, all of the conspirators would have been either killed in the fighting or subsequently put to death. The Free Coloreds, Joseph Pitt, Washington Franklin, he was executed. Cain Davis, all the names. These are names that we should hold dear. Richard Sargent, King William, Coffee Ned. I mean, we can go on and on.
Once again, emphasizing the importance of research and deconstructing history. This has been an act of great courage. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for your time, I look forward to having you with me again next week.